Hi. This week, the new Golden Dome Award list came out, which is the Vermont Middle Grade Book Award list. And so I thought I would choose a book from the 2022 list. In this case, we're going to read Yusuf Azeem is Not a Hero by Saadia Faruqi. And this book is about just a middle schooler, just like any of you, who's trying to navigate middle school, starting, the year, and it's like he's got new lockers, and his best friend isn't in his classes, and he's got a teacher that he thinks doesn't really like him, and he, is just trying to navigate all of those weirdnesses, and then on top of that, his family is from Pakistan, and they are a Muslim family. And so that he's got the kind of issues that a lot of cross-cultural families will probably relate to, which is trying to maintain a culture at home that is maybe different from what a lot of the classmates that he has cultures might be. And then on top of that, it is this book takes place in 2021, right during the 20th anniversary of the September 11th attacks on the World Trade Center, which a time when unfortunately a lot of Muslim Americans were not treated very well because a lot of people mistakenly associated all Muslims with the terrorists that were on the planes that hit the World Trade Centers. So I'm going to read you the first couple chapters of this great book. You suck. The paper lay face up on the locker floor. White lined notebook paper, black ink. Yusuf blinked and read it again. You suck. He wasn't sure if the paper was meant for him or was left over by the last person to use locker 130A. He looked at the other kids walking around, smiling and high-fiving. The student lockers in the south hallway of Fry Middle School were painted blue. Not a light sky blue, which everyone knew was for babies, but a deep grayish blue, a color that announced, "Welcome to middle school," without being cheesy. Just a few seconds ago, Yusuf had been thrilled at opening his locker for the first time. Lockers were for big kids. They meant something more than storage. They meant you were old enough. He'd been grinning as he'd spun the dial carefully to make sure he got the numbers right. 7020. Easy. He'd already memorized the combination written on the class schedule he'd been emailed the night before. That was also a middle school thing, apparently. An email account from the school where he'd get school announcements directly. His username was Yusuf_Azeem, it said on the schedule, right next to the locker code. Yusuf Azeem, son of the famous Mohammed Azeem from A to Z Dollar Store on Marbury Street. And now this. He pushed his glasses higher up on his nose. Then he looked down and studied the inside of the locker. You suck. The paper made everything go quiet, like a movie suddenly on mute. He bent his head and studied the paper the way he studied a new Lego instruction manual. The K had a flourish that turned into a long straight line. The Y had a curl, as if the writer had tried to learn cursive but had given up. His breathing slowed. The hair on the back of his neck bristled. What should he do? Only for a minute, though. Someone jostled his side lightly as they passed. The world began to move again. Yusuf let out his breath with a whoosh. He decided the paper was a mistake. Students were streaming into the gym from the hallways, their faces bent to their schedules to figure out where to go. Nobody could have decided he sucked in the 10 minutes since the school bell rang. It had to be a mistake. Middle school was going to be awesome. He knew that 2021 was going to be his year. Cafeteria food, Chromebooks, robotics club, this blue-gray locker. By the way, this week is National Robotics Week, so this book also fits in timely there. And most important, the annual Texas Robotics Competition. Yusuf couldn't wait for things to get started. He'd been preparing for the TRC his entire life. It was time for life to get interesting. Principal Williamson was short and energetic, with bouncy brown hair tied in a ponytail and her face thick with makeup that shone under the gym lights. She wore a silky blue jumpsuit with sequins on the collar and held a microphone in her hands like a DJ. At least that's what Yusuf thought DJs dressed like. You needed to go to Houston or Austin for an actual concert, and Amma and Abba would faint if he ever suggested it. Good Muslim kids didn't go to concerts, they'd say, frowning with disappointment. Daniel had found a place on the floor all the way in the far corner of the gym. Over here, he waved to Yusuf. Yusuf sank down in the empty spot next to his best friend. Why didn't you walk to school with me? He grumbled, fiddling with his glasses. Daniel shrugged, his floppy black hair spilling onto his forehead and around his ears. My mom wanted to drop me off since it was the first day and all. I think she just wanted to show off her new Jeep. Yusuf squished the tiny spark of envy inside his chest. Daniel's parents were computer engineers, and they worked in the new Exxon regional headquarters about 20 miles out of town. This was his mom's third new car since Daniel was born. Come home with me after school? Daniel asked. I got a new Lego set we can build together. Yusuf stared straight ahead at Principal Williamson. She stood on a little wooden stage, checking her microphone, whispering, Hello? Hello? Can't, he replied reluctantly. My mamu is visiting at dinner. The uncle from Houston? He's cool. Yusuf didn't say that a Lego set sounded cooler. That was a given. But Uncle Rahman came a close second. Did you set up your email yet? Daniel continued. I'm thinking of changing my username to Lego Maniac 2021. Yusuf didn't know you could change your username. Why would anyone want to do that? I'm okay with mine. Besides, what will you do next year? Change it to 2022? Daniel obviously hadn't thought of that. He shrugged like he didn't care, but his face was scrunched up as if he'd swallowed a pickle. This is so childish, he complained, nodding to the front of the gym. What? It's middle school. It's what they do on the first day. Yusuf was sure this welcome assembly was a time-honored tradition. At least that's what the email last night had said. The sound system crackled, making them jump. Hello, boys and girls. Welcome to Fry Middle. I'm your principal, Mrs. Williamson, and I'll be your pilot for the duration of your flight. There was silence and a few groans. Principal Williamson looked around with a pained face. Wow, tough crowd. Okay, no worries. I realize it's the first day of middle school for some of you, and you're probably still in summer vacation mode. Not a problem. Now, let me go over some rules before you all head on to your classrooms. Yusuf tried to listen to the rules. He really did. There were easy ones like no running in the hallways and no fighting ever. Wandering the school without a hall pass was the biggest crime a kid could commit, apparently. There was something about bathroom breaks and a great deal about the sports teams you could join. But the note in his locker kept swimming into his vision until Mrs. Williamson's face resembled a lined notebook paper with black letters on it. Did you open your locker yet? He whispered to Daniel. Daniel was jotting down the names of all the sports clubs on the palm of his hand. Soccer on Monday, basketball on Tuesday and Friday, wrestling on Wednesday, yoga on Thursday. Why would anyone choose yoga? He whispered back. Yoga's for old ladies. Yoga's meditation from ancient India. I really don't care. It's for old ladies. Yusuf decided there was no use arguing. He chewed the inside of his cheek and then asked again, Locker? Dude, I didn't even get to my locker yet, Daniel replied. I think the last class can still access them in the first week of school. Yusuf didn't know how Daniel knew this. His father, Mr. Khan, was on the school board, so all sorts of school secrets were probably discussed at their dinner table. A wave of relief washed over Yusuf. The note in his locker could have been left over from the year before. It was meant for somebody else, maybe someone who actually sucked. Definitely not Yusuf. Okay, who can tell me the 3 values of Fry Middle School? Shouted Mrs. Williamson, the sequins on her jumpsuit glinting brightly. The first one starts with a P. The gym erupted into laughter. It's perseverance, whispered Yusuf, but nobody could hear him over the noise. Chapter 2. After the assembly was over, Yusuf and Daniel stood in the hallway outside the gym comparing class schedules. They weren't in any classes together, which was the worst news. They'd been together ever since kindergarten, except in 3rd grade, which Daniel had labeled the year of sorrows. This is a bad sign, Daniel pronounced, pushing his hair out of his eyes. How will you function without me? Yusuf ducked his head to hide his smile. I'll manage somehow, don't worry. They were standing right under a big white banner that said, Welcome, new students, and a smaller black one that said, Never forget, 20 years. Yusuf examined the black one. 20 years was a very long time to keep remembering something. Daniel hefted his new Star Wars backpack higher on his shoulder. It was so shiny new it still had the plastic wire of the tag attached to one strap. I think this will be the middle school of sorrows. Yusuf looked back at Danielle. Don't be silly. We'll get to see each other in lunch and PE and library. Those are all baby classes. No, they're not, Yusuf replied cheerfully, firmly. They're the most essential classes, nourishing the body and the brain and the spirit. Ugh, you're so positive it's disgusting. Yusuf said, Remember over the summer how we built Lego robots and watched Texas News Network with Abba in the store? Man, those were some messed up news reports on TNN. People hating on anybody who's different, Danielle replied. Why does your dad watch that all the time? He says we should know what's going on around us, learn about the worst, and hope for the best. Danielle chortled. Yeah, he's always saying that. He should make a poster and hang it over his checkout counter next to that plaque of his. Or maybe even replace that old plaque. It's getting rusty. He'll never replace that plaque, not in a million years. Yusuf started walking. Anyway, what I'm saying is that's how we should begin middle school. Learn the worst and hope for the best. Daniel followed, his backbone bent. I repeat, ugh. They separated in the hallway outside the gym and went in opposite directions. Yusuf watched for a minute as Danielle grew smaller in the distance. Good luck, he called out, but Danielle was too far away to hear him. He hefted his backpack and walked slowly. Yusuf _ Azeem, reporting for duty. Despite his positivity, his stomach was rumbling. Classes without his best friend, a locker with a mean note inside, and it wasn't even 9 o'clock in the morning yet. He wished he hadn't eaten the fried eggs Amma had cooked. They always left his mouth feeling greasy. Pretty soon, though, the morning improved, because first period was science. Yusuf's science teacher was Mr. Parker, which was the best news on the class schedule. Mr. Parker had been voted Teacher of the Year 7 years in a row, his name proudly displayed on a billboard on El Paso Street where the twin buildings of Fry Elementary and Fry Middle School stood. The Evening News had sent a reporter to interview him this past summer. That was how Yusuf knew. The teacher held a degree in chemistry from the University of Houston, had 2 teenage sons, and liked strawberry shortcake ice cream. Science is going to be very interesting this year, kids, Mr. Parker announced, his clipped brown mustache stretching with his smile. We'll do some cool science experiments right here in the classroom. How much do you know about slime? A few of the kids groaned, as if Mr. Parker was being cheesy. Yusuf wanted to smile back at him, but he hesitated. Maybe smiling at teachers in middle school was frowned upon by others? He sneaked a peek at the rest of the class. There were a few kids he already knew, like Madison Ensley, who was always picked line leader in every elementary grade class, and Cameron Abdullah, who wore one shiny earring and made the weirdest jokes. Of course, in a town the size of Fry, there were hardly ever any new kids. They all knew one another. Mr. Parker was writing safety instructions on the whiteboard in a blue dry erase marker. Number 1, follow the rules. Number 2, notify the teacher immediately if there's a fire or a spill. Number 3, wear safety goggles for lab activities. Yusuf thought the rules looked like code. Everybody knew programming code came in steps or sequences. His hands itched to write some code, but he forced himself to copy down Mr. Parker's safety rules instead. When he looked up, his eyes met Cameron's, a.k.a. Kamran. Cameron wiggled his eyebrows and rolled his eyes at Mr. Parker. Boring, he mouthed. Yusuf shook his head. Mr. Parker's safety instructions might not be exciting, but they were essential. On his last visit to Fry, Uncle Rahman had told Yusuf about a lab technician in his hospital who mixed some chemicals wrong. Not only was there a mini lab explosion, but the tech's eyebrows had gotten singed because he forgot to wear goggles. The image made Yusuf grin. He could just imagine the poor lab assistant without eyebrows. Glad my safety rules are making you laugh, young man. Yusuf gulped and looked carefully at Mr. Parker. I was thinking of something I'd heard, he confessed. He tapped the frame of his glasses with a finger. About? Yusuf had no intention of starting 6th grade on the wrong foot. He ducked his head. Nothing, sir. I'm sorry. What's your name? Came the dreaded question. For a split second, Yusuf thought about using an American version of his name. Joseph? Joe? How hard could it be? After all, Kamran had managed the transformation into Cameron in 5th grade without any trouble. It was the first day of middle school. He could do it if he wanted. No. Abba always said, be proud of who you are, be proud of the name and everything that comes with it. He took a deep breath and said, enunciating each syllable clearly, Yusuf Azeem, sir. Then Mr. Parker said, well, Yusuf Azeem, sir, please listen carefully because your first assignment will be on these safety rules. Yusuf stared at Mr. Parker, and Mr. Parker stared back solemnly for 6 whole seconds before turning to the whiteboard. Cameron made a shocked face with both hands over his cheeks and mouthed, Busted! Yusuf stared straight ahead for the rest of the class, focusing all his energy like a laser beam at Mr. Parker's shiny forehead.